If I believe I'm not good enough, I'm going to then develop sub-beliefs that help me survive under the perspective of not good enough. If you think about your emotions, like where do your emotions live? Like they don't actually exist in your head. They actually exist in your body.
Drasko Raicevic runs UpLevelMind.com, a coaching program and a podcast of the same name. His specialty is healing the human behind the entrepreneur so they can become better business owners. His up-level mind method quickly and permanently eliminates the head trash and emotional blocks that stop entrepreneurs from becoming the leaders that can scale. As a result, his clients experience more of what matters to them: more profit, more freedom, and more fulfillment. This is the third time that we've had Drasko on the Be Better broadcast. So I'll have the previous episodes in the description. They are all incredible to listen to. Today, we're going to talk about some of those similar things and what's developed since we first talked about them. But it's important to realize with Drasko, he mainly works with entrepreneurs who are already quote unquote successful in their business. And it's great to have him on the show because he doesn't do many podcasts. So when we have him here, you're really only going to see him here as well as his own shows. But you, even if you are a beginning entrepreneur, even if you are a leader inside of a company, the principles that we talk about today with Up-Level Mind and everything that Drasko does and helps his clients with will be useful for you, even if you're not the type of client that he normally works with. But if you are, then you can pursue that with him after the episode, if it makes sense for you. So if you take away even just one piece of advice or strategy, or maybe we made you smile, all that we ask is that you share this episode with just one other person who could use it as well. You are the reason the broadcast has grown the way that it has over the past 2 years, and we're almost to episode 300 because of you, because you're the best part of the Be Better team. So without further ado, let's talk to the man himself, Mr. Drasko Raicevic. Drasko, it's great to have you back on the show for the third time, brother.
Great to be back. I mean, just like I was saying before, I'm like, at this point, I need a T-shirt. Like, you know, there should be like a complimentary one for coming back on. But yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Like I said, I love being on here. I don't do many podcasts other than my own. So yeah, man, love our conversations. Love to dive into all the things.
That's awesome. So when we talked last time, your program was very new. So Up-Level Mind coaching was it was a new concept, but the strategies you've been practicing for a long time. So I'd like to ask you, for those who didn't hear the last episode, what is Up-Level Mind? What is the philosophy and the concept behind it, and how do you help people with it?
Correct. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool because you've interviewed me in like different iterations of where my business has been since I've kind of moved away from the brick and mortar space into being online, which I think we talked about in our first episode, so people can dive into that. As far as Up-Level Mind, like what it ultimately exists and why it ultimately exists is like I really imploded my first brick and mortar business that was supposed to be successful by all metrics on paper because I couldn't recognize and get out of my own way with all of my, what I call emotional constipation, emotional blocks, and just mindset issues that were making me do very stupid decisions looking back on it. Like I imploded because I was essentially trying to prove that I could be worthy, that I could be a successful entrepreneur. That meant that, you know, I was good enough, that if I healed enough people, I could heal myself. All these things that are now like absolutely obvious when I look back. So because I had gone through that experience and it forced me into this healing work, that kind of evolved into really reigniting in me, like, this is really what I'm here to do. Like, yes, this experience was painful. Yes, it was such a foundational experience for me. And it also gave me something like you can't read in a book. And I knew that I needed to translate this into the work that I was truly passionate about, which was helping not just entrepreneurs avoid the route that like I went through, but really thrive out of never having to go into that and be in a state where they can go from good to great. Because ultimately, like, we are the bottleneck to wherever our business is at, regardless of how big it is or small it is. Like, we are the bottleneck to it. And like you mentioned at the beginning, like I work with entrepreneurs that are more successful. Like I like to just kind of say, like, I work with more established entrepreneurs. And the reason is not because the mindset doesn't matter at the beginning stages. It definitely does. It's just kind of the 1.0 version of the mindset issues that I tend to work with. And you need a skill set in order to get established, and no amount of mindset work's going to help you get that skill set. So if like I'm talking to somebody that's at that kind of beginning stage, it's like, listen, the mindset work is important, and a lot of it is going to come from you developing the skill sets to be able to actually execute to get to an established place, which I say at a minimum is kind of like the 6-figure range. But then once you're there, the 2.0 versions of these things can really be a havoc, because now you got more to lose. Now you have a somewhat established brand. Now you got more responsibility. So it's like the pressures of that mount to something that is a much different version that you dealt with at the beginning. And that's been kind of my sweet spot, where I'm not the first person people see, but when they do come to me, then I tend to be the one that unlocks all the things they need to do to really go to the next level of their business.
Yes, because if you're, you've heard the quote from Tony Robbins, if you're not growing, then you're dying, right? So now that you're at the 6-figure mark, let's talk about Joe Schmo. He's at 6 figures. He can either go to the next step. So let's say he's at 100,000. He can either go to 200, 300, 400, a million, whatever that might be, or he's going to fall down, right? So you're either growing or you're dying. So let me ask you, is there a difference in the mindset between 100,000 and a million than 1,000 and 100,000? What's the difference in the mindset that you've seen from the people that you've actually worked with yourself? Are they different problems? Are they similar problems? What have you seen?
So actually, it's cool that you bring this up, because I know I mentioned to you, like, I have this workshop that I was putting together. It's called the Peacefully Ambitious CEO Workshop, and it actually dives into like this very question. So that's why I'm bringing it up in this way. So I took a look at the hundreds of like coaching calls that I've gone through, and that's through the Uplevel Mind podcast, which has over 200 of them like posted. That was the original podcast that I put together, plus the ones that I've done with clients. And I started to look for, okay, like, what are the common patterns amongst the things that I do? And basically what it came down to is, in reference to your question of like, okay, well, what's the difference between going from like 0 to 100K and then 100K to like a million, which is generally where I work with now. So what you got to realize is, like, if you look at the demands of your business, they tend to grow in a non-linear fashion. So what does this mean? So if you think of something like clients, like, to serve one client isn't that big of a deal, but then to serve 10, you can't be disorganized to serve 10 in the same amount of way. Like, the demands on the communication, the fulfillment, the admin you're going to have to do grow in this kind of exponential type way. And you get the skills and you learn the things to able to accommodate that, right? What ends up happening is, though, is like your inner limits, so like your mindset issues, your emotional issues, grow actually at the exact same pace. So if you look at something like, doubt or imposter syndrome, generally to go from a 0 to like a 6 figures, so like 100K minimum, you get there in one of 3 ways, or a combination of 3 ways, which I call the outs. You get good at outworking like your doubt and limitations. You get good at outlearning it. So you invest in coaching, you invest in programs, you invest in reading, all the things to learn the strategies that, when implemented, get you over the hump. So it's like, my doubt doesn't really matter if I'm getting the results, right? So you get good at outworking it, you get good at outlearning it, or you get good at outthinking it. So you start to meditate, you start to do affirmations, you start to journal, you start to have this self-awareness from this mental perspective, where you have better thoughts and you change the like station of your mindset to be more aligned with getting over the hump of these issues. And generally those outs do a pretty good job at getting you to the 6-figure level. Now, what I mentioned at the beginning, it's like your mindset issues and your inner limits grow exponentially, just like the demands of your business, which is kind of why you have to hire and you have to organize and systematize and do all of these things. So at some point, everything that worked to get you to 6 figures stops working. Okay. All of your outs start working. So the demands of where your business needs you to be as a leader starts to outgrow your skill set and ability to either outwork, because that has a limit, outthink. It's like, at some point, like, you can only do so many affirmations before you realize like something's not working, right? Or like, you keep investing in things to learn, you keep learning a new thing, you keep implementing a new thing, but you can't get over this ceiling. So when you hit this wall where your outs stop working, what it actually amounts to in practice isn't like this linear stop and like I hit a wall. it actually becomes a circle. And that's what I call the overwhelm hamster wheel, because you keep trying to outwork, you keep trying to outthink, you keep trying to outlearn. And all that does is produce more overwhelm, more overstress, more overwork. And that's what creates the business ceiling that you're at. So where I start to come in is really for entrepreneurs that the demands of their business and where they want to take their business has exceeded their abilities to do the outs. And at that point, you just need a different tool set. You need to heal a lot of what I call the leadership limits, which is the impact that these outs actually have. And we can get into all of those, but like to specifically answer your question, like that's the difference. It's like everything that all the outs that work to get you to six figures don't work anymore to get you higher than that. So you need a different tool for the job. You need to address the problem in a different way. And that's kind of where I come in, and we can dive into what that all looks like, but that's kind of the long answer to your question.
No, I absolutely love that answer. So outwork, outlearn, or outthink, or outthink. That will get you to 100K. But at that point, now you need different tools, you need different skills. And if you continue to do the outs, like you said, it will lead to the overwhelm hamster wheel. Now you're just going in a circle over and over and over. So you mentioned what you call leadership limits. Okay. And these are a cause of the three outs that we just talked about. Now, this is the first time I'm hearing the leadership limits. So is this something that has newly developed as part of Uplevel Mind? And this goes into the overarching question of how has Uplevel Mind developed, and what have you learned that you've entered into the program based on experience with clients that wasn't there when we spoke last? Like, what are some new developments that you've come across?
Yes, I mean, as always, great questions that are going to get me to go into 10 different directions. Okay, so yeah, as far as the leadership limit, so they are the why behind why you have the overwhelm hamster wheel. It's like these outs are the things that perpetuate it, right? Like that's what drives the circle to keep going, which is why it's a hamster wheel. But the reason why it gets powered is due to these leadership limits. So this isn't something that necessarily like I created, much like all this, like this kind of exists. This is just my way of how I put it together. The way that I describe leadership limits, I think the best way to understand it is, so I use this analogy of the rider and the elephant. So I don't know if you're familiar with like habit change, but this is like a popular model in like habit change. And the basic premise of it is, if you look at this model of, so you have the rider, which kind of controls the direction that the elephant and the rider go. And you have the elephant, which is much bigger than the rider. And it essentially does all of the work, right? So the real question there, and to understand this analogy, is like, okay, well, who's actually in control? Like a natural inclination is like, well, the rider and the human is in control because like they know that they take care of the animal, they do whatever. But like, it's only in control to the degree that the elephant wants to actually move in the same direction. Like as soon as the elephant's like, I'm not going there, like there's literally nothing you could do to get the elephant to move forward. So this is a great analogy with regards to how I look at leadership limits, which are basically this umbrella term that encompasses our like mindset and head trash and the emotional blocks or emotional woundings or past trauma that we've had, etc. So if you look at the rider and the elephant, the rider is basically our conscious mind. So it is the part of us that has the vision. It is the part that knows exactly what you're capable of. It's the one that knows, what I should be doing, but I'm not doing. It's the part that's able to figure out. Essentially, it's where all of your outs live. So your outthink, outlearn, and outwork, because all of those are conscious decisions to push past any of these inner limits. The elephant is where all of your subconscious lies, right? That's where the woundings are, the trauma lies, the mindset issues, the head trash, etc. The problem is where you consciously want to go, like where your rider wants to lead you to, that is in direct opposition to what the elephant actually finds safe. Like it, in some warped logic, finds that where you want to go consciously is in direct opposition of what it feels safe to do for whatever emotional logic actually exists, right? So the classic example of this is like, I know what I should be doing, but I'm not doing it, right? Like welcome to Team Human. Like all of us have experienced that in various different ways. So leadership limits is basically what I call all of the ways that the elephant takes us one step or like two steps back while the rider is pushing to go one step forward.
Oh,
Okay. So it encompasses all of the patterns that you either know or don't know that always hold you back. So we'll give it various different labels of like imposter syndrome to doubt to self-worth to shiny objects. And like, there is like, I have like 7 dimensions of these that I've broken down in the actual workshop that you can self-identify with. But it's like the more of these that you have, the greater the impact of the elephant pulling you back actually is. So you can't get rid of the outs. You can't get rid of the overwhelm hamster wheel if you have this elephant constantly going in the opposite direction. Like it's always going to be an uphill battle, which is why you're trying to outwork, you're trying to outlearn, you're trying to outthink your way through it. But it's like, it's not working. The only way for it to work is for you to actually heal all the parts of the elephant that are afraid to go where your conscious mind wants to go, and then eliminate those by embarking and embodying it in actual actions to like feel safe in doing these things. So that basically when you align the elephant and the rider and they're both going the right direction, like that's when you can be what I call the peacefully ambitious CEO, like somebody who is at peace owning their ambition for more and is showing up as a leader as opposed to, I say like quote, just an entrepreneur, trying to essentially out hustle their way through these. So that's kind of long answer to question number 1. And as far as like how the program has evolved to include all of this. So like I said, this whole workshop and breakdown happened because I just analyzed like hundreds of hours of coaching calls with entrepreneurs that were going through all of this. And I looked at all the patterns and kind of break all this down. So the way that the program itself has evolved, it's like it just gotten really tailored into allowing you to identify exactly, what are those patterns and your leadership limits that are causing you the most harm and pulling you back away from where you want to go the most. And then just zeroing in across 12 to 16 hours that essentially the coaching container actually is to reveal, heal, and eliminate all of those permanently. So the big focus is on like, we just kind of go down that list and we just knock those out so that by the end of the program, it's like, like I just had a client recently. She was like, she had a lifetime of believing that she was mediocre and stupid. Right. So like you can imagine how hard it is to make a lot of strategic decisions when you just continuously think you're like stupid. Right.
yes.
Which is logically, you're not stupid because like you've done all the things that you've done. And we just had like a check-in and I got her to like, we're kind of at the halfway point. At the halfway point, you go back through your list of patterns and you're like, hey, which ones are still affecting you? Which ones are limited? She's like, I haven't thought about being stupid in like the last 3 weeks.
Damn.
This is like like decades worth of repetitive thought. So the idea being is like when you focus on the deletion of these things, it just opens up the road and it becomes so easy because then the elephant and the rider are aligned and it's like you don't actually have to do a lot. You just kind of express whatever it is you want to create in your business. So that's really how the program itself has evolved to just really be laser focused on eliminating these leadership limits so that at the end of the day, like what you need to do. You just got to get rid of the back and forth of the elephant and the rider, and that's it.
Wow. What a framework. What you said so important for people to hear too. This client is a successful business owner, entrepreneur. They're established. A lot of people probably look at this individual and they think, wow, she's got it all together. She's got everything she wants. She's got the house, got the car, all these things. But this person is still coming home and thinking, I'm stupid. I'm not worthy of this. I'm not good enough for this. But other people don't see that. They just see the outward result of what she's created. But the reason I say this is so many people feel the same way. So many people have these leadership limits. They have the doubt, the imposter syndrome, and the other 5, whatever those are. And again, you can go check out, guys, the Peacefully Ambitious CEO workshop, as well as the podcast with Drasko, which we'll talk about what you can expect with that a little bit later. But if you are someone who's thinking, I'm not enough, I'm stupid, again, it's that survival brain, like similar to what you said, it's that survival brain that's gotten so comfortable with this pattern of thinking where even when you do create this success over here, that lizard brain is still saying, no, Drasko, you're still this, you're that. And I love how you mentioned that because, again, you work with people who are established, yet people who are established can still feel these ways.
100%. And like you mentioned that it was like the survival brain. Like that's exactly what it is. Like, and one of the things, because like I mentioned before, like I'm generally not the first person that people see, meaning that they've done a lot of work on themselves already. Like I said, that they're focused on outthinking, they're focused on outlearning. So like they've invested in themselves before. And what I always tell them is like, don't discount all of the work you've done to get to this point, because it got you to this point. And fundamentally, like as much as we hate on our brains and these like survival parts, like this is just your brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. Like
Mhm.
it's designed to repeat the things that have shown evidence that they keep you alive.
Yes.
That is in direct opposition to everything we want to do as far as ambition and goals and getting out there, right? None of these, like these are all emotional and social threats. None of them are physical. So that's why they're so much harder to identify, but like they're still in direct opposition to all of the patterns. Like, you know, people pleasing is a big one that I deal with. Like all
Mhm.
of those patterns are survival strategies on how to navigate the world as a wounded child who needs the support of their parents in order to just actually like be okay. And that's oftentimes like where these conversations tend to lead. So it's like your brain's actually doing what it needs to do, and that's fine. But it's also in direct opposition to, like I said, where your rider and where your ambition actually wants to go. So if you want to be the business leader that can actually get the business there, then you're going to have a much easier job without the baggage of these unnecessary consequences of things that served a purpose at one point, but are just now working against you. So yeah, I love the fact that you use that term, because that's literally exactly what it is.
Something I love that you said last time is that, okay, so once you remove the quote unquote baggage and someone's worked with you for the 12 to 14 hours, I think I asked you last time, what happens after that? And your answer, if I remember correctly, was something along the lines of, well, then there's new problems to solve, right? And there's always something new. You're now working off of a different foundation that was laid in the past work that was done. So the name of the game here is progress. There's no end destination, because once you get to the $1 million mark, again, are you going to grow or are you going to die, right? Or maybe you're going to sell and you're going to grow something new. So it can go many different directions, but the name of the game is continuous progress forward. I love it. So let me ask you this. I brought up a couple of quotes here from your Instagram page that I really liked. And I want to run a few by you, and then I want to specifically talk to you about a couple of these leadership limits. So the first quote that I really liked is, "The body tells you the quality of your mind."
Mm.
Now,
Yeah.
I again am a big fan of Tony Robbins, and he talks a lot about physiology, right? If you want to change how you feel, then change what you're doing with your body. When you say that the body tells you the quality of your mind, what do you mean by that?
So if there's anybody on here that's ever like dove into any of the literature around like trauma, like one other very common phrase that's often repeated is like the body keeps a score, or what the mind forgets, the body remembers. So the idea being is like, if you think about your emotions, like where do your emotions live? Like they don't actually exist in your head. They actually exist in your body. They exist and are felt and experienced through your nervous system. So oftentimes you're going to have feelings or emotions that don't actually have like a thought associated with them. Like it takes awareness work, and it takes like sitting with yourself in these uncomfortable situations and uncomfortable states to actually discern what your body is experiencing and put it into a thought form that you can actually do something with. So when it comes to this thing of like, okay, well, it's your body that tells you the state and the quality of like essentially what you're thinking. If you're unsure of why something is happening, you tune into the body and actually begin to explore that way. Right. And even if I take it back to the rider and the elephant analogy, like the elephant is so much bigger than the rider. And even if you think about it, like neck down is the majority of your body. The majority of your nervous system actually lives neck down. Yet so much of our efforts are in neck up. Let me
Wow.
try and figure this out. Let me try and think this through. Let me try and affirm this out. Let me try and journal this. And I'm not saying those aren't important. They all are. Yet it's like we're ignoring the 95% that is actually where all this stuff is being experienced,
Mm.
right? So whenever I work with clients, one of the first places we always start is actually getting them in tune with realizing and experiencing and being safe to explore all of the emotions that at some point or other they have repressed and or not actually addressed.
Hmm.
So that's really what it comes down to. Like if all of your outthinking efforts aren't working, so like I'm reading, I'm meditating, I'm journaling, even I'm going to talk therapy, if like that's where the talk therapy like stops, then you're using the wrong tool for the job. Meaning like you can't outthink your emotions. They're two completely different skill sets. So it's like, I need a drill to drill the screw, but I'm trying to hammer it in. Like there's a reason why this isn't working.
Yeah.
And that's why so many people have such a hard time with personal development. And like I'm in this camp. Like for anybody watching this live, like there's a stack of books behind me. And yes, it's my strategically placed bookcase to make me look, smarter than I actually am. But it's also a reminder that like I wasted a shit ton of time going through and like learning a lot of stuff that ultimately like didn't really lead anywhere. And it didn't lead anywhere because I was ignoring everything from the neck down. And not even
Mm.
just ignoring, I actually like just given my own upbringing, like I didn't have the tool kit, the tool set, the skill set to actually tune in, discern, and figure out what was actually going on there, much less to then be able to work with it. So again, long-winded answer to
You
that.
don't know what
I
you
hope
don't
that
know.
answered the questions.
Exactly. So when you're working with somebody who they are experiencing these feelings, the negative feelings of being a people pleaser, or this individual you worked with who didn't feel enough, she felt stupid, or someone who does feel imposter syndrome, you can work on what's neck up or you can work on the vast majority that's neck down. So how would you begin to help somebody? Let's use a really common one of imposter syndrome. I'd say people pleasing, but we've talked about that in the show a lot. But imposter syndrome is a big one. How do you help someone to release this from their body rather than just reading a book on how to overcome imposter syndrome? What does that look like?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And it's okay. So the correct answer is always it depends because it's a very individual thing. So I just want to
Hmm.
like note that in. Now, generally, how do I work with it? So in the program, we basically what I say, like we work on 3 levels of human transformation: the mind, the emotions and nervous system, and then the actions. So the reason so many times people try and like work through these things and they fail is they generally work on one, maybe 2 aspects of human transformation. They kind of like stop there. And usually it's something to do, like I mentioned before, with the mind. So if like imposter syndrome at the end of the day, like ironically, like I don't actually believe in imposter syndrome, but it's a common label that many people associate with. Like realistically, I just think it's been morphed into a label put on the anxiety I feel when I try to authentically show up in the visibility of my expertise,
That's
right? Like
fair.
essentially that's kind of where it happens. So now look, if you examine just that, so I feel anxiety. So if we're talking about the elephant and the rider, so neck down, my elephant doesn't feel safe in stepping up into the visibility of my expertise. So what's in that? Well, first of all, you do have expertise. So I'm ignoring the scenario where it's like you're just like hitting above your pay grade and you don't actually know the thing. So like you do actually know the things, but you're not showing yourself to be visible in it. So that means my nervous system over time has learned that it's unsafe to be put in positions where other people get to judge me even on things that I know like enough about.
Hmm.
So I have to then look at, okay, well, what are the beliefs of that nervous system response? So, the individual might not just have like beliefs around like, I'm not good enough or whatever. And those oftentimes come about, but they'll have what are called like survival beliefs. So if you think about it, like inherently, if I believe I'm not good enough, I'm going to then develop sub beliefs that help me survive under the perspective of not good enough. So what makes me good enough is always being right. what makes me good enough is never being wrong. What makes me good enough is people telling me that I am right and good. So now how you operate in the world is going to be direct reflection of those survival beliefs. So you're going to constantly optimize and put yourself into positions where other people get to give you praise, where you're never doing things where you're not wrong, where you're overthinking and making sure you've crossed all the I's and or whatever, dotted all the I's, crossed the T's before you actually come up and be visible.
Yeah.
And or you're just going to avoid being visible to begin with, because what makes me good enough is making sure that other people like me and that I'm always right. Okay.
Is that a
So
safe thing to create that belief of I always need to be right? Because there's going to be a lot of situations where people are not right, even if they prepare.
correct. Well, and that's a granular example of what I talked about at the beginning of like a leadership limit, right? So that's like, here is something that I believe and I don't want to believe it anymore. But when I do believe it, it's the elephant pulling me 2 steps back, because there's no way you can do entrepreneurship and like always be right. Like
Yeah,
zero chance, right? And essentially anything that's worthwhile doing, you can never be 100% right, right?
exactly.
So like that is an example of how, okay, so this is now a leadership limit in the form of, let's just say, doubt or limiting beliefs or an inner critic that's always pulling me back. What my business is asking out of me is, let's just say, to iterate a lot with content so I can find my messaging and like grow this business. But because I keep stopping myself because of this faulty belief, then I'm always taking 2 steps back for 1 step forward. And then I'm looping this overwhelm hamster wheel. I'm trying to outwork that. I'm trying to outthink that. Let me journal harder. Let me invest in this other coaching thing, because then, I'll find this magical thing that gets my content to be perfect. That's like a perfect example of like how that actually manifests. But getting back to the original question, like, okay, well, how do you work through this?
Yeah.
So, right, like, so you've now identified on the mind level what are the actual beliefs that circulate around this thing, and we focus on deletion. So it's like actually eliminating those out of your psyche, like I mentioned with my client that was saying like she was stupid. But now that's not really complete, because you still have 2 other levels, right? So you have the emotional level to feel safe, and then you have the action level to actually embody that when it counts, which is live. So the emotional piece of that, like, we go through various different processes to really, same thing, delete the emotional charge from the body around this whole thing. So if I
Wow.
can begin to like transmute these feelings of like anxiousness and soothe them and recognize them for what they are, which is generally like a naive is kind of the wrong word, but like this innocent like associations with what this actually means. And if you can begin to like just soothe those and heal those and recognize them for what they are, then you take a lot of the charge out of those situations. So it becomes easier to then go into level 3, which is embody this in real time. So a big part of our program is like, in session, we'll do levels 1 and 2, the mind work, the emotional work. But then a big part of the quote unquote homework is, okay, now that like you've eliminated the beliefs, you've taken the charge out, now your homework is like, go out into the world and do the thing. Because really that's where you normalize a new normal, by going out and actually reinforcing that, like, I now don't hold the beliefs that hold me back. My body recognizes why it is safe to go there, and now I'm creating evidence that it is actually safe to go there. And when you complete that loop over and over again, that's where you set up like a whole new normal. And then like, this just isn't an issue for me anymore. Hence, that's how I define like the elimination of these patterns.
Okay, so when it comes to the physical embodiment of the emotions and you're helping someone to remove the charge. So let's say we have someone who's feeling anxious, someone who maybe has the jitters when they're about to do something and it hinders them from actually taking the action, or someone who may even say, I feel depressed, right? And I guess only that person would know what that actually feels like, but they have a charge somewhere in their body, right? And the goal is to, from what I'm understanding of you're saying, is to delete beliefs, but also to create new beliefs that can remove that charge. So the removal of the charge comes down to creating new beliefs that are often opposites of the original. Is that
So
correct?
they can be. I think that that is
Okay.
one area where like you just replace a better belief. But oftentimes what I find is like it's enough to just make the space you're stepping into safe. So if we're talking about imposter syndrome and like let's just say it shows up when I have to give a presentation,
Yeah.
it's just like removing the parts of you that don't feel like it's safe or that you're going to be hurt like emotionally
Mhm.
and or that there's going to be some like threat or something bad happen. Like oftentimes if you just remove those associations both emotionally and mentally, it just kind of gives you this clean slate that you're like, oh, okay, then like I just gotta go and like do my thing. Like you
Yeah.
can go the extra step, and sometimes that is necessary. I don't find it to be as necessary as often with regards to the work that I do because you do get rid of that emotional charge. That it just kind of like it takes care of itself most of the time.
And
And
when you're creating that different belief, essentially you're doing work above the neck, which then creates an effect below the neck.
correct. And that's like this is now where it gets nuanced in how this happens with the individual. But that's why like the action part is important. Because to
Okay.
me, the way that I define embodiment is thinking, feeling, and acting in alignment with the result that you want.
Mm.
Right. So the thinking part is the new belief. So like the new belief is I'm an expert and like, I'm good enough to do this. Cool. If
Yeah.
that works for you, awesome. Eliminating the charge that you're going to be hurt if you go out and be visible in your expertise, that gives you a clean slate to go out and do the thing. So now when I repeat the new belief and I step up and I do the thing, that automatically is going to create a self-reinforcing positive emotion. Like it's over time in doing the thing that you're going to create evidence for your nervous system to be like, ooh, this is actually safe.
Mhm.
Right. This is why like you have to do all three levels in order to actually make this a new normal. And the other part that I just want to highlight for people here, because it's a very important nuance, especially with something like anxiety. There is anxiety that is like normal and expected and hardwired into us whenever we do a new thing. And then there is anxiety from wounding. What I'm talking about when I talk about eliminating things and like deleting them and taking the charge out, I'm talking about the anxiety from wounding. The anxiety that at some point has learned that it's not safe and or it's a threat to go down the road of whatever this, business execution thing you're going to do. When you remove that, all that's really left is just a natural anxiety that like when people talk about like anxiety or like nervousness and excitement are the same thing physiologically,
Yeah.
like that is a hardwired response that essentially gives you energy and alertness to do something new,
Mm.
right?
Got it.
You can't like that and being comfortable with that in novel situation. I put that in the transformation, like the action category of it. Like you
Okay.
just actually have to put in the reps to be comfortable with that experience. Like you
Yeah.
cannot bypass things that are hardwired. And that's just the nature of being human. So, and that's kind of like I said, like it's very important to work on the nuances of all three levels because if you're expecting to delete that like response, you're always going to be stuck in the overall hamster because it's impossible. It's
True.
hardwired into who we are. What
Wow.
I'm talking about is the unnecessary emotional wounding that really makes no sense, that maybe served you when you were 6 and you got reprimanded for whatever it is that you did, or you grew up in whatever kind of circumstances you grew up in. Like that served you to survive at that time. It doesn't serve you when you're a clear expert and you're about to give a presentation that can really like, change your business or whatever. It
Mhm.
is logically and perfectly safe, but my responses are totally not safe, which is again, that's the elephant moving back. But me being nervous because I'm doing something novel, welcome to a physiological response of just being human, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very, very important distinction because so many people will chase the like elimination of all feelings when the reality is like
You
either
want
yourself
those.
or you have to have somebody to like walk you through nuances to be like, no, 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 this is actually okay and normal. You just have to get better at being in this space versus, it's kind of like you can't get like you can't go swimming if you never expect to get wet. Like
True.
there's certain things come with the nature of the beast. So
Yeah. But then
there.
if you do 100 presentations and you're still like whimpering and quivering when you're getting on stage, then that's a different thing that you then want to work on. Maybe even 10 presentations. At that point, that novel feeling of anxiety slash confidence that should start to become more comfortable, or you should start to feel more comfortable with that because you've experienced that. But I really like that. I've never heard someone explain it in that way. I've heard people say anxiety is very similar to confidence in the way that it manifests itself in your body. And you want that. You don't want to get rid of that. And I've even coached and instructed leaders in the company that I work with that exact phrase, but I've never been able to explain why that is. And I love how you said it's being human, right? That's a novel experience that you're putting yourself into. So talking about action, and then I want to talk about Peacefully Ambitious, the podcast. Action. You on Instagram, you wrote something very similar to what you just said. The process of embodiment is aligning thought, feeling, and acting with the desired result. So this assumes that we have a desired result. This assumes that we have a target that we're going after, right? So now how do we align all three of these things together to become a smooth running machine? How do we combine everything we've talked about so far to move forward?
Yeah, so I think I've touched on all of these like pieces already. So I guess I'll kind of just maybe summarize it and add a few things. So my approach first is like, before we add anything, we want to get rid of the friction points, or what I call the leaks in the bucket. So if we go back to like kind of what I started this whole thing with, talking about the outs and the overwhelm hamster wheel, etc. Like if you think about that, all of the outs, so the outthinking, outworking, outlearning, they all work. Right. Like I'm not at all saying don't invest in your business, don't journal, like don't work hard, do all of those things. The problem with those things is when they stop working to get you the result that you want. And usually that gap is what your business demands out of your leadership and who you need to be to take the business to the next level. Your outs are not enough any longer. You need a different skill set. So the way that I visually describe this in the workshop is like, if you think of your outs as pouring into the bucket of your leadership capacity, right? Like if my leadership capacity is in its full capacity, then everything I invest into from a business coaching perspective, I can implement with full authentic expression. All of my work becomes focused without a lot of the extra baggage and energy wasted in like overthinking or whatever. So I can move forward that way. And then the way that I think is in alignment with all of that. So just everything, the outs then work.
Yeah.
What happens is when the outs pour into this bucket of leadership potential, all of our leadership limits, so all of these self-defeating patterns, so the people pleasing, the doubt, the imposter syndrome, all the things we've talked about, you can think of all of those as leaks in the bucket. So the more leadership limits you have, the more leaks in the bucket end up happening. And that spillover is basically what amounts to your overwhelm hamster wheel, right? That's why it's this constant ceiling where you're constantly in stress, but nothing is really moving forward. So the natural inclination is for us to do more, right? So I got to, again, outthink, outwork, outdo so that I can get the results that I want. And that is important, but it's important once you actually plug the holes of that bucket. So my first thing is, as I've talked about already, is like when you focus on deletion, now all of the outs that you're doing to actually move yourself forward begin to work, because now like you're raising the leadership capacity you actually have. Now you're working from overflow. Now you have this clean slate where you're not getting in your own way. Your elephant and your rider are actually aligned. So then it just becomes so much easier to actually do the thing. Now, going back to your question of, okay, well, what then is like embodiment and alignment? So when you delete the stuff that moves you away from the results that you want, now it's so much easier to think, feel, and act in alignment with what I want. So like I said before, like when the part of you that thinks the only way for people to like me and the only way I'll ever be good enough is if I never make a mistake, if that part's gone, all that's left is like your authentic expression to just do the things you do, knowing that a mistake isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Like if I inherently am in that state, like I don't have to do a lot of work to like psych myself up and like, I'm good enough even if I make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Making mistakes will, get me closer to the thing that I want. Like you can do all those things if you find them useful. But more often than not, they're just like a crutch to actually doing these things, because again, we're trying to outthink and outwork our way out of these sensations. So when you have that clean slate, my belief is that our natural whole self, without these added limiting patterns, just kind of knows what to do. And you can like test this for yourself. Like, how would you have a vision of everything that you want and know everything you should be doing if a part of you didn't already exist that kind of embodied that to begin with? The problem is that all these other survival parts by design are always going to be louder and more prominent and take priority, because if you're not alive, you can't actually exercise any of these things. But like when you get these pieces out of the way, all that's left is like your full whole self, and it just becomes a lot easier to operate out of that. And then, you know, you can just refine the specific pieces of like, okay, I slip up here and there, so I can do some like thought hygiene work to like make that happen. I have to be more consistent in my actions. Like, then all of the general like productivity and personal development hacks or whatever have a place to actually latch onto, and it becomes easier to kind of refine and iterate to align with the results that you want.
Oh, I love listening to you, man. Just because you aren't just giving the personal development hacks here. You're not saying, you know, wake up at 5 a.m. and then read this book and then meditate. And then, you know, you're going deep. And again, this isn't for everyone at the same point in their journey. This is for that specific person at the specific point in their journey who wants to go deep and really understand the inner workings of why these things work and what's the next step to take. And just from this conversation, you've given people a lot of next steps to take. And I love talking with you too, because this conversation was different than the last one, and it was different than the one before that. It's always new, yet still rooted in the same principles of deep transformation that is everlasting. I freaking love it. You've already touched on it a bit, but give us an idea of what people can expect when they tune into Peacefully Ambitious CEO, your new podcast. You mentioned there's going to be a lot in this podcast about the leadership limits in more detail. So what can people expect about this show, and where can people find and tune in?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, just to give the evolution of it. So my first podcast was actually just me doing live coaching calls with entrepreneurs. So at this point, we have like 200 episodes of me delivering breakthroughs with, you know, complete entrepreneur strangers that come on to discuss these things that are dealing with them. And that's been good and great, but it's just like the next evolution of that is like I actually want to share the specifics of the general concepts that you don't have to come on and, you know, bare your soul to the world to kind of get the help that you need. So what I'm doing with the Peaceful Ambitious CEO is, like I said, the workshop was the first thing that kind of started, which was me breaking down like hundreds of hours of these things to share some of the patterns that I've actually shared with you today. And then the podcast is basically an accompaniment to that. So the idea is, if at some point you're like, okay, well, I have issues with imposter syndrome, I'm going to have an episode on imposter syndrome and like dive into exactly what I've been diving into here of like how you can look at it, how you can move through it. And then obviously, if you want to go deeper into that, all of the episodes are going to connect to the Peacefully Ambitious CEO workshop, which is a series of both self-assessments and teachings. It takes about 45 minutes to go through the same thing that basically helps you identify which is your top out pattern that's currently creating your overwhelm hamster wheel, what impact your leadership limits have on actually perpetuating your overwhelm hamster wheel, and then most importantly, give you a personalized blueprint from your results on what you actually need to address if you want to move beyond the overwork, the overstress, the overwhelm, essentially overwhelm hamster wheel, into stepping into what I call the Peaceful Ambitious CEO, which is a thriving, fulfilled business leader. So that's the workshop, like in a nutshell. And the podcast is just going to be diving into all of those leadership limits. And, you know, it's just me speaking as opposed to me coaching. But what I want it to be is like an evergreen resource for anybody at any point, regardless of if you're at the stage to work with me or not. Like, you can go there, you can get the support you need, you can get the self-awareness from the actual workshop. And then also, like, there's some tools in there as well. So the Peacefully Ambitious CEO Toolkit has 3 tools I use with my client all the time. So the Overwhelm Eliminator, so how to get rid of overwhelm with essentially 10 words. Anxiety Alchemy, so how to turn these looping anxious thoughts into like fuel. And what I call the High Achiever Fulfillment, so like how to actually like tune into that ambition for more and do it without the guilt and the baggage that we oftentimes have with it. So that's kind of, my contribution to the world. So yeah, that's actually just starting right now. So you guys are kind of getting the brink of it. I have the first episode up already, and then I'm going to be posting a lot more as time goes on.
And like you said, this is a culmination of those several hundred coaching episodes, you going through, analyzing them, what worked best, what worked in the least amount of time possible that can help people. And now you're just sharing those breakthroughs on this show that is just you, which is really cool. And I can't wait to tune into it. What's your website where people can find you?
Yeah, so everything is with Uplevel Mind. So Uplevel Mind Coaching is my Instagram. If people want to reach out to me directly, uplevelmind.com is the regular website with all the info on the program. And then if people want the actual workshop, it's on the website. But if you want to go directly, uplevelmind.com/PA-CEO. So Peacefully Ambitious CEO.
Huge. Drasko, round 3, brother. Well done. This was a lot of fun, and I'm really glad that we made it happen. So thanks for coming back on the show, and I'm grateful to have you as a friend. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you as well.
Whether you are at the beginning of your personal development or your business journey, you're making $1,000 a month, you're making $5,000, you're making $10,000, you're over that $100,000 a year mark, or maybe you're over that mark and you're going towards the 7-figure mark, the 8-figure mark. You're continuing to grow. You are in an organization as a CEO, as a top level leader or an executive, and you're ready for that next step. Drasko has given you the foundation as well as the many different stepping stones to take your personal and professional growth to the next level, and not at a surface level, but at a very deep transformational level. This is one of those episodes, and I don't say this a lot, that you have to re-listen to probably 10 times in order to get all the nuggets away. I have literally a page of notes from this conversation, and I'm going to go back over them myself to go over the 3 outs as well as everything that builds off of those things as well. So Drasko, again, amazing having you back on the show, brother. I hope you guys liked this conversation as well. If you did, please share the show with just one other person who could use it as well. You're the reason that we've grown the way that we have over the past few years to nearly 300 episodes, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. Go check out Drasko's profile and website. Links are in the description. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.